The sun rose gently over the grand palace, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens. Today was no ordinary day. People had gathered quietly in anticipation, whispers filling the air. Staff moved briskly, checking decorations, adjusting the ceremonial banners, and ensuring every detail was perfect. A sense of nervous excitement buzzed through the corridors. Something important was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. Outside, the courtyard was alive with activity. Soldiers in polished uniforms stood at attention, their boots gleaming in the morning light. Each guard carried himself with a sense of pride and discipline that spoke of years of rigorous training. Their movements were precise, almost robotic. Yet there was a warmth in the way they held their heads high, a quiet confidence that came from deep loyalty to the palace and the traditions it represented. News had spread that a foreign military officer, high-ranking and well-known, was coming to inspect the palace and witness the ceremonial guards. His reputation had preceded him. Stories of his strict adherence to protocol and sharp commands were well known among the staff. Many felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. How would this visitor, used to obedience and unquestioning respect, react to the palace's own unique customs? No one could predict. Inside the palace, the air was tense yet orderly. The senior officials discussed the final details. Everything had to be perfect, from the alignment of the guards to the timing of the music that would accompany the ceremony. The officials exchanged glances, each silently acknowledging the importance of the day. This was not just about a formal visit, it was about demonstrating the strength of centuries-old traditions and the dignity of the palace itself. As the clock ticked closer to the appointed hour, a black luxury car arrived at the main entrance. The foreign officer stepped out, tall and imposing, wearing a uniform that gleamed with medals and insignia. His presence immediately drew attention. Photographers and journalists scrambled to capture the moment, their cameras clicking rapidly. The officer's eyes scanned the courtyard, expecting the guards to immediately recognize his authority. He was used to being in control, to having his orders followed without question. The courtyard fell silent as the officer approached. Every detail of the scene seemed amplified. The sound of boots on stone, the crisp folds of the flags, the shimmer of polished armor. The guards stood rigid, their eyes straight ahead, hands at their sides. There was a quiet dignity in their stance, a sense that they were guardians not just of the palace, but of something much larger, the history and traditions that had shaped this place for generations. The officer stopped in front of the guards and gave a sharp command for them to salute. He expected immediate compliance, a mechanical response that would affirm his authority. But instead of the expected movement, nothing happened. The guard in the front row remained perfectly still, his eyes forward, his posture unyielding. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, and then the silence stretched longer than anyone expected. Whispers began to ripple through the onlookers. Some gasped quietly, others shifted uneasily. The tension was palpable. The officer's face showed a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by frustration. He raised his voice, repeating the command, each word clipped and authoritative. Still, the guard did not move. It was as if he was carved from stone, an unbreakable figure who could not be swayed by anger or intimidation. A palace aide stepped forward cautiously, trying to explain the situation. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed a hint of concern. The foreign officer's patience was thinning, and every second of hesitation seemed to stretch into eternity. The aide whispered something quickly, hoping it would resolve the moment, but the officer was too focused on the perceived defiance to listen. The other guards shifted slightly, their movements synchronized but subtle, showing support without breaking protocol. It was a delicate balance, showing unity while maintaining the rules that had governed them for centuries. The tension in the courtyard was almost unbearable. Everyone was watching, holding their breath, knowing that this moment would be remembered long after it was over. The officer's jaw tightened. He was accustomed to obedience, to commands being carried out without question. He could not understand why this single guard refused. In his world, this would have been unthinkable. Yet here in this palace steeped in tradition, the rules were different. The guard's refusal was not personal. It was a statement about the values he represented, about the centuries of discipline and ceremony that had shaped his role. Meanwhile, the staff and officials watched silently, understanding the significance of what was happening. They had trained for many possibilities, but this was a test of more than just protocol. It was a test of patience, of understanding, and of respect. The tension gradually shifted from fear of confrontation to admiration for the guard's composure. There was something inspiring in the way he held his position, in the quiet courage it took to uphold tradition in the face of pressure. Photographers and journalists captured every detail, every flicker of emotion and every subtle movement. They could see the story unfolding in real time, a clash between expectation and tradition, between authority and principle. It was more than a ceremonial event. It was a moment that highlighted the essence of honor and respect. The guard stood as a living symbol of those ideals, a reminder that some things were bigger than any single person's rank or power. As the minutes passed, the officer's anger began to soften, replaced by a growing curiosity. He observed the guard more closely, noticing the precision in his stance, the calm determination in his eyes, and the unwavering commitment to duty. The officer had encountered many soldiers in his career, but few had demonstrated this level of discipline, this level of adherence to a code that was unspoken yet universally understood within the palace walls. Slowly, a senior palace official stepped forward to address the officer directly. His voice was measured and respectful but firm. He explained the rules of the ceremonial guard, the centuries-old traditions that dictated their actions, and why certain gestures like a salute to a foreign officer were not permitted without specific protocols. He emphasized that this was not a matter of disrespect, but of maintaining the integrity and honor of the palace and its symbols. The officer listened carefully, absorbing the explanation. He realized that the guard's behavior was not defiance for the sake of defiance, but a reflection of a deeply rooted system of respect and duty. The tension began to ease as understanding replaced frustration. What initially seemed like a confrontation transformed into a lesson in cultural and ceremonial significance, showing that true respect sometimes required restraint and adherence to principles, rather than blind obedience. The courtyard remained quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted. The officer straightened his posture, a new respect forming in his eyes. He looked at the guard, and for the first time saw not a soldier who had refused him, but a professional who embodied the ideals of discipline and loyalty. The moment had changed from one of potential conflict to one of mutual recognition, a silent acknowledgement that honor could be expressed in many forms. The staff, officials, and spectators felt a sense of relief and admiration. They had witnessed something rare and profound, a reminder that traditions and principles hold power, even in the face of authority. The guard, still standing tall, had conveyed a message stronger than words. He had shown that duty, respect, and courage were not just about following orders, but about understanding and upholding the values that define an institution and a culture. In the following moments, photographers captured the interaction, framing it as a historic and symbolic event. The officer, now composed, prepared to proceed with the inspection, while the guards remained in their ceremonial positions, a silent testament to the enduring strength of tradition. The sun continued its rise, illuminating the palace and its courtyard, highlighting a scene that would be remembered for years to come as an example of honor, respect, and the quiet power of steadfast principles. The courtyard was thick with tension as the foreign officer stood before the guard who refused to salute. The officer's brow furrowed and he spoke again, his voice sharper than before. He could not comprehend why someone would stand still in the face of an order he believed should be obeyed without question. Around him, the palace staff exchanged nervous glances. They knew that this moment could shape the perception of the palace, the traditions, and the guard's honor. The guard remained motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead. There was no sign of fear, no hesitation, only quiet determination. He had trained for years to uphold the ceremonial rules of the palace, and this was no exception. Obedience to protocol was more important than yielding to personal commands. His stance was a living statement of discipline, and it radiated a silent strength that made it difficult for anyone to challenge him. The officer stepped closer, his voice rising, demanding the salute once more. The camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing every second of this unusual confrontation. Spectators in the courtyard leaned forward, their curiosity mixing with a hint of worry. This was a situation no one had expected, a moment that challenged expectations and tested patience. Whispers spread among the officials. Some suggested calming the officer, while others wondered if the guard's refusal would offend him beyond repair. One of the senior palace aides quietly approached the officer and spoke in a measured tone, attempting to explain the traditions that governed the guard's behavior. The officer, however, was still focused on the idea of obedience. He was used to situations where authority was followed without question, and this resistance was unfamiliar. The guard did not falter. He held his position, the polished uniform crisp and immaculate, reflecting the morning light. His hands rested at his sides and his expression remained neutral, a perfect blend of serenity and steadfastness. Those watching began to sense that his refusal was not an act of defiance but a display of principle and pride in his duties. It became clear that this was about upholding a system, not challenging the officer personally. The tension in the courtyard grew as seconds passed. It felt as if time itself had slowed. The officer's frustration was evident, his eyes narrowing as he tried to find a way to assert control. Yet the guard remained calm, embodying the centuries-old traditions of the palace. His silence spoke louder than words ever could, and slowly a shift began to occur. The people around him started to see the situation in a new light. It was no longer just a confrontation. It was a lesson in respect, tradition, and dignity. Finally, one of the palace officials stepped forward with a sense of authority. His presence commanded attention, and his voice carried a gentle firmness. He addressed the officer, explaining that the guard's role was bound by centuries of ceremonial protocol. While the officer was an important guest, the rules governing the palace and its guards were clear and strict. The explanation highlighted that the refusal to salute was not disrespectful, but a matter of maintaining centuries-old customs that symbolized honor and integrity. The officer listened, his face a mix of surprise and reflection. He realized that what he initially saw as insubordination was actually a display of dedication and principle. The guard's refusal was not about disobedience. It was about upholding a sacred duty. This realization brought a subtle change in the officer's demeanor. Anger softened, replaced by curiosity and respect. He began to understand the weight of tradition, the value of discipline, and the power of silent resistance rooted in principle. The courtyard, once tense and anxious, slowly began to breathe again. Staff members exhaled quietly, relieved that the situation had not escalated into confrontation. Photographers continued to capture the moment, understanding its significance. This event was more than a ceremonial visit. It was a story of courage, tradition, and the quiet power of standing firm. As the officer observed the guard, he noticed the care in his posture, the precision in his movements, and the unwavering focus in his eyes. Every detail reflected years of rigorous training and dedication. It was clear that this was not an ordinary soldier. He was a guardian of history, a symbol of values that had been passed down through generations. The officer could not help but feel a sense of admiration, mixed with a new understanding of the importance of respect that transcends rank. The senior official continued to explain the nuances of palace protocol. He described how every gesture had meaning, how tradition dictated actions, and how the guard's loyalty was not only to the royal family, but also to the institution and its history. He emphasized that the guard's conduct represented centuries of discipline and honor, and that breaking protocol could diminish the very essence of what they were sworn to protect. The officer listened intently, realizing that this was a lesson in humility and cultural awareness. For the first time, the officer spoke quietly, asking questions rather than giving orders. He inquired about the history of the guards, their training, and the significance of each ceremonial action. The answers revealed a depth of tradition that he had never encountered before. The courtyard, once filled with tension, now resonated with a sense of mutual respect. The foreign officer began to appreciate the values that guided the guards, seeing them as more than just soldiers. They were keepers of a legacy. The guard remained motionless throughout, a model of patience and resolve. He did not seek recognition or approval. His focus was on fulfilling his duty to the fullest extent. His steadfastness became a silent teacher to everyone present, showing that true respect often comes from adherence to principles rather than blind obedience. Spectators began to understand that the guard's strength lay in his unwavering commitment to duty, an inspiring demonstration of courage in the face of pressure. Slowly, the tension began to lift entirely. The officer's posture relaxed and a new respect formed in his eyes. He acknowledged the guard with a nod, a gesture that was simple but full of meaning. It was a recognition of professionalism, integrity, and the courage to stand firm without confrontation. The atmosphere in the courtyard shifted from one of potential conflict to one of admiration and understanding. Staff and officials exchanged smiles, understanding the significance of the moment. The guards' actions had communicated a powerful message. Respect is earned through principles, discipline, and the willingness to uphold tradition, even when challenged. The foreign officer, once frustrated, had gained a new perspective. Recognizing that the value of these traditions went beyond simple protocol, they represented the soul of the palace and its history. Photographers continued to capture the interaction, framing it as a historic moment of cultural pride and integrity. The guard had become a symbol, not only for the palace but also for the idea that standing firm in one's duty is a form of courage that commands admiration. The officer prepared to continue with his inspection, now moving with a deeper understanding of the palace's traditions and the respect they commanded. As the officer walked among the guards, he observed their precision, discipline, and focus. He saw the commitment in every movement, the pride in every stance, and the honor in every gesture. It became clear that these guards were not merely performers of ceremony. They were custodians of history, living examples of values that had been preserved through generations. The officer's respect deepened, and he realized that his initial expectations had been incomplete. There was a richness here that could not be measured by rank or authority alone. By the end of the inspection, the officer had changed. What began as a confrontation had transformed into a moment of learning and respect. The guard's steadfastness had conveyed a message stronger than words, demonstrating that true strength lies in discipline, principle, and quiet courage. The courtyard, once tense with uncertainty, now radiated a sense of harmony and mutual understanding. The story of the guard's refusal spread quickly among the staff and observers. They spoke of his bravery, his unwavering commitment to tradition, and the dignity with which he faced an unexpected challenge. The officer, once focused solely on authority, had gained a new appreciation for the values that guided these remarkable individuals. It was a lesson that would remain with him for the rest of his life, a reminder that respect is not given automatically, but earned through integrity, dedication, and the courage to stand firm. The courtyard had settled into a strange calm after the initial tension. The foreign officer now walked slowly among the guards, observing each one with a newfound appreciation. His eyes scanned their uniforms, their precise movements, and the quiet coordination that made the ceremony so seamless. What had started as a confrontation had transformed into a demonstration of discipline and tradition that impressed him more than any display of obedience he had witnessed before. The guard who had refused to salute remained in the front, his posture unchanging, his gaze unwavering. Every person who watched him could see the story in his stillness. This was not just about following rules, it was about representing an institution, a culture, and centuries of history. The officer realized that the guard's refusal was actually a form of strength, not weakness, a form of respect, not defiance. It was a lesson he hadn't expected to learn. Staff members and officials around the courtyard started to relax. They had feared the situation might escalate, yet it had turned into something far more meaningful. People whispered among themselves about the courage it took to remain calm under scrutiny, especially when faced with someone so authoritative. The guard's resolve seemed to inspire everyone, reminding them that true honor was often shown in silence rather than in words. Suddenly, a new movement caught the officer's eye. Another group of guards began their ceremonial march, each step perfectly timed, their synchronized movements displaying years of training and discipline. The officer watched in admiration, realizing that the integrity of these traditions depended on the collective commitment of each guard. It was not the act of a single person that upheld the ceremony, but the unity of all who participated. The refusal of one, in this context, highlighted the larger importance of rules that preserved order and dignity. The officer's earlier frustration had now turned into curiosity. He asked questions quietly, almost hesitantly, about the training, the history, and the daily routines of the guards. The senior palace official answered patiently, explaining how every guard learned to balance strict obedience to protocol with a sense of personal integrity. Each step, each gesture, and even the way they stood still carried meaning and history. The officer began to see the depth of what he had initially dismissed as mere ceremonial display. There was a philosophy behind it, a guiding principle that shaped the behavior of everyone present. Meanwhile, the guard in the front never moved. He did not respond to the officer's silent scrutiny or the gazes of those around him. His composure was remarkable, not because he was defiant, but because he understood the weight of his duty. His silence was deliberate, a reflection of the discipline ingrained in him through years of training. The courtyard, once filled with tension, now resonated with quiet respect for the steadfastness of this individual. The officer's aides began taking notes, realizing that this event was more than a simple ceremonial inspection. They understood that it might be a lesson in humility and awareness of cultural values. What impressed them most was not the uniform, the medals, or even the precision of the ceremony, but the guard's courage to follow the rules of his own institution, even when faced with pressure from someone powerful. The officer, now silent, watched closely, seemingly reflecting on what he had learned. Across the courtyard, the rest of the guards continued their duties flawlessly. Each movement was executed with precision, yet each person seemed to understand the greater purpose behind their actions. The foreign officer observed the seamless coordination and the subtle communication between the guards. He realized that every minor action, every small adjustment contributed to the dignity of the ceremony. The guard who had refused to salute had become the central figure in this demonstration, symbolizing the essence of discipline and honor. A senior official then invited the officer to walk with him along the rows of guards. Explaining the finer points of the ceremonial practices, he pointed out the small details, from the way hands rested at the sides to the exact timing of steps and the significance of posture. The officer was attentive, absorbing the information with the seriousness of someone who understood that this was more than a display. It was a representation of centuries of tradition. Every step, every stance had been designed to honor history, and he began to see why deviation, even at the request of a high-ranking visitor, could not be permitted. The guard in the front continued to hold his position, becoming a silent teacher of values. The officer began to nod as if acknowledging the lessons that had been quietly imparted. There was no need for words. The example itself was powerful. Others in the courtyard noticed the subtle change in the officer's demeanor. What had begun as confrontation had evolved into an exchange of respect, and it became clear that the guard had earned that respect through his composure and adherence to principle. Time passed, and the officer's focus shifted. He began to understand that obedience was not always about yielding to authority. Sometimes it was about understanding the rules that governed behavior and following them faithfully. He saw that the guards were not just performing a ceremony. They were embodying the history and values of the palace. In that moment, the courtyard became a classroom, with the guard as the unexpected instructor. The officer then addressed a question to the senior official about the consequences for guards who failed to follow protocol. The answer was delivered with calm authority. The system itself ensured discipline, and every guard was trained to internalize the rules rather than be forced into compliance. This concept fascinated the officer. It was a structure that valued integrity and self-discipline above all else. He realized that this was a kind of strength he had rarely seen, one that did not rely on power or intimidation but on understanding and commitment. The guard in the front remained unwavering, yet a subtle acknowledgement passed between him and his commanding officer. It was almost imperceptible, but it conveyed trust, confidence, and mutual understanding. The officer noticed the quiet communication and realized that there was an unspoken language within this disciplined group. It was a language of respect, duty, and shared purpose. This understanding deepened the officer's appreciation for the palace's traditions. Gradually, the atmosphere in the courtyard transformed. The tension that had been so palpable at the beginning was replaced by a sense of admiration. The officer moved with a slower, more deliberate pace, taking the time to observe the precision and discipline of the guards. Staff members smiled quietly, realizing that the event had surpassed their expectations. The guards' refusal to salute had become a defining moment, demonstrating the true essence of the ceremonial traditions. Observers began to murmur about the significance of the moment. Journalists and photographers documented every detail, knowing that this story would capture the imagination of people far beyond the palace walls. It was not just about protocol or military courtesy. It was a story about courage, integrity, and the quiet power of steadfast principles. The guard had shown that respect is not given automatically. It is earned through discipline and adherence to values. The officer, now fully engaged, asked more questions about the daily routines of the guards, their training regimens, and the rituals that governed their conduct. Each answer revealed a depth of preparation and dedication that went beyond mere duty. The officer realized that the ceremonial guards were more than symbols. They were living embodiments of honor, discipline, and cultural heritage. His admiration for their commitment grew with every passing moment. As the inspection continued, the courtyard became a place of shared understanding. The foreign officer, once focused solely on his authority, now saw the broader picture. He understood that true leadership involves recognizing and respecting the principles that others uphold, even when they differ from one's own expectations. The guard's silent demonstration of principle had taught him a valuable lesson about humility and respect. Finally, the officer acknowledged the guard directly, not with a salute, but with a subtle nod and a quiet word of respect. It was a gesture that carried meaning far greater than any formal ceremony could convey. The guard, maintaining his position, accepted this acknowledgement silently, knowing that his duty had been fulfilled. The courtyard, once filled with tension, now resonated with mutual respect and understanding. By the end of the visit, the officer had gained a new perspective on discipline, tradition, and honor. The guard's refusal to salute, initially perceived as defiance, had become a symbol of unwavering commitment to principle. The entire courtyard had witnessed a moment of profound significance, one that transcended cultural and military differences. The guard had proven that courage and respect can manifest in stillness, and that principles, when upheld with integrity, command admiration from even the most powerful individuals. The air in the courtyard remained calm but charged with anticipation. After witnessing the guard's silent yet firm refusal, the foreign officer stood still for a moment, reflecting on what had just happened. He had arrived expecting obedience without question, and instead he found a display of unwavering discipline that challenged his assumptions. For a brief moment he realized that authority alone did not command respect. Principle and integrity could speak louder than words or orders. The senior palace official, sensing the importance of this turning point, approached the officer with measured steps. His presence was calm, yet his voice carried authority. He began to explain the significance of the guard's actions in a clear and respectful manner. He spoke of centuries of tradition, emphasizing that the ceremonial rules were carefully crafted over generations to honor the palace, its history, and the values it represented. Every guard, he explained, was trained not just to follow instructions, but to embody these values in their actions. The officer listened intently, his initial frustration slowly giving way to curiosity and understanding. The official continued, describing the delicate balance between ceremonial protocol and personal authority. While foreign officers were welcomed with respect and courtesy, the rules of the palace dictated that certain gestures, like a salute from the guards, required specific conditions to be met. These rules ensured that the dignity and consistency of the ceremony were preserved, no matter who the visitor was. As the officer absorbed this information, he glanced again at the guard who had refused the salute. The man stood unwavering, his expression calm, his posture perfect. There was a quiet strength in his stillness, a confidence rooted in knowledge and training. The officer began to see that this refusal was not an act of defiance, but a deliberate demonstration of duty and respect for the rules that had governed the palace for centuries. In a way, the guard had taught a lesson in humility and professionalism. Around them, the courtyard buzzed with quiet excitement. Staff members exchanged glances, aware that this was a rare moment where tradition and authority intersected in such a striking way. Photographers captured every detail, from the precise posture of the guards to the subtle expressions on the faces of the officers and officials. The atmosphere was a mixture of tension and admiration, a unique blend that few had ever witnessed. The officer, now more composed, asked questions about the history of the guards and the ceremonies they performed. The official explained how each gesture, each movement, and each stance had been carefully designed to reflect centuries of cultural heritage. The officer listened with genuine interest, realizing that there was more to these displays than met the eye. They were not mere formalities. They were living symbols of loyalty, honor, and tradition. As the conversation continued, The officer began to understand that the guard's refusal was not meant to challenge him personally, but to uphold a principle that transcended individual authority. He realized that the rules of the palace were not arbitrary. They were a framework for preserving dignity and consistency, ensuring that every visitor, regardless of rank, experienced the same level of respect. This perspective gradually transformed the officer's understanding. Replacing irritation with a sense of respect and reflection, the guard remained in his position, silent and composed, a living testament to the values he represented. His stillness was powerful, conveying lessons that words could not capture. The officer found himself studying the guard's posture, noting the precision of each detail and the quiet confidence that radiated from him. It was clear that this was not simply a performance. It was an embodiment of principles that had been cultivated over generations. The senior official then invited the officer to observe the entire ceremonial process more closely. As they walked along the rows of guards, the official pointed out small but significant details. The way each guard's uniform was perfectly aligned, the timing of their movements, the subtle gestures that communicated discipline and unity. The officer noticed that each guard's focus was unwavering, that every action was intentional and precise. It became clear that the integrity of the ceremony depended on the collective commitment of all the guards. The officer asked how the guards trained to achieve such coordination and discipline. The official explained the rigorous routines, the attention to detail, and the emphasis on understanding the historical and cultural significance behind each action. The officer listened with genuine interest, realizing that the training was not just physical. It was mental, emotional, and philosophical. The guards were taught to internalize the values of the palace, ensuring that their conduct reflected honor and respect at all times. As they continued, the officer's admiration grew. He began to see the depth of responsibility carried by the guards and the trust placed in them by the palace. The guard who had refused the salute became the focal point of this realization, a symbol of integrity and discipline. The officer acknowledged silently that this man had earned a level of respect that could not be commanded by rank alone. Nearby, the other staff and officials observed the interaction quietly. They felt a sense of pride, knowing that the guard had represented the palace's values with such clarity and courage. The moment highlighted the strength of traditions and the importance of maintaining principles, even when faced with challenging circumstances. It was a reminder that true honor comes from steadfast commitment to duty, not from seeking approval or recognition. The officer, now fully engaged, asked more questions about specific rules and protocols, seeking to understand the reasoning behind them. The official provided thoughtful answers, explaining how consistency and respect were maintained through careful adherence to tradition. The officer began to appreciate that these practices were not rigid or outdated. They were living systems designed to uphold dignity and integrity in every interaction. Meanwhile, the guard remained in position, demonstrating the power of quiet strength. His presence commanded attention, and his actions, or lack thereof, spoke volumes. The officer realized that this was a rare opportunity to witness a human lesson in discipline and courage, a moment that transcended ceremonial duties and touched on deeper values. He reflected on how easily authority could be misunderstood without an understanding of context, and how respect could be earned through principle rather than force. The official concluded the explanation by highlighting the importance of mutual understanding and cultural awareness. He emphasized that true respect requires recognizing and honoring the values that guide others, even if they differ from one's own. The officer nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in these words. He now saw the guard's refusal not as a challenge, but as a demonstration of integrity and honor that demanded recognition. As the visit came to a close, the officer took a moment to observe the guard once more. The man stood perfectly still, embodying the lessons he had just conveyed through his actions. The officer felt a sense of humility and respect, recognizing that authority alone does not define leadership or honor. The guard's example had left a lasting impression, one that would influence the officer's perspective for years to come. Photographers captured the final moments, ensuring that the story would be remembered and shared. The courtyard, once filled with tension and uncertainty, now reflected harmony, respect, and understanding. The officer departed with a newfound appreciation for the palace's traditions and the people who upheld them. The guard, silent and steadfast, remained a symbol of integrity, demonstrating that true honor is expressed not through words or obedience, but through unwavering commitment to principle and duty. The foreign officer had completed his inspection of the palace, and yet the memory of the guard's steadfast refusal lingered in his mind. As he walked through the grand corridors, he could not shake the image of the man standing perfectly still, his posture disciplined, his eyes unwavering. It was more than a gesture of duty. It was a lesson in courage, respect, and integrity. The officer realized that the guard had demonstrated something few could: the ability to uphold principle without aggression, without confrontation, and without faltering. Back in the courtyard, life had begun to return to its usual rhythm. Guards resumed their duties, staff attended to routine tasks, and the sun cast a warm glow across the palace grounds. Yet the impact of what had happened earlier was undeniable. Whispers of admiration passed among the staff. Many had never witnessed such a clear example of integrity in action. The guard's quiet defiance had become a story in itself, inspiring those who were present and providing a powerful lesson about the nature of respect and tradition. The foreign officer, now seated in a private area of the palace, reflected on the day. He thought about how often he had encountered situations where obedience was expected without question, and how differently this event had unfolded. Here, authority alone was not enough. The palace had its own rules, and the guard had followed them with precision. It was a striking reminder that respect cannot simply be demanded. It must be understood, earned, and reciprocated. The officer's aides noted his contemplative expression, recognizing that he was processing something profound. He asked questions about the guard's training, his background, and the history of the ceremonial rules. The answers painted a picture of a life dedicated to discipline, honor, and service. Every detail of the guard's routine, from how he polished his uniform to how he held his stance, was deliberate, designed to uphold the dignity of the palace. It was a level of commitment that transcended the ordinary expectations of military protocol. The officer was particularly fascinated by the idea that the guard's actions were guided by centuries of tradition. He had assumed that authority was universal, that commands should be followed regardless of context. Yet here, the rules of the palace created a framework where even the most powerful visitor was subject to the institution's principles. The guard's refusal was not disrespectful. It was a demonstration of the rules in practice. The officer found himself admiring the balance of firmness and dignity, realizing that discipline and respect were inseparable. As the officer continued to observe the palace and interact with the staff, he noticed the subtle ways the guards communicated with each other. A slight nod, a shift of posture, a small gesture, all conveyed meaning without breaking the formality of the ceremony. He understood that this was a highly sophisticated system of coordination, one that required both precision and understanding of context. The guard at the center of the earlier incident had exemplified this perfectly, showing that steadfastness and awareness could coexist in the most demanding situations. Word of the incident had begun to spread beyond the immediate courtyard. Staff members shared the story quietly, noting how the guard's actions had commanded respect without a single word. Photographers had captured the moment, ensuring that the event would reach a wider audience. The story quickly became one of admiration and reflection, illustrating the timeless values of integrity, discipline, and courage. People outside the palace began to see the guard not just as an individual, but as a symbol of the principles that the palace represented. The officer's perspective continued to evolve. He realized that leadership and authority were not solely about issuing commands. They were about understanding context, respecting traditions, and recognizing the value of principle. The guard's refusal had been a silent assertion of these truths, a demonstration that integrity sometimes requires courage and calm resolve. It was a lesson that resonated deeply, leaving a lasting impression on the officer's understanding of respect and duty. Back in the courtyard, the guard had quietly resumed his routine, maintaining his composure and professionalism. Though the officer had departed, the impact of the encounter lingered. The guard's colleagues observed him with renewed admiration, recognizing that he had demonstrated the essence of their shared values. It was a moment that reinforced the importance of tradition, discipline, and quiet courage. The courtyard had witnessed not just a ceremonial act, but a powerful story of human integrity in action. The officer later shared his reflections with his aides, noting that he had never anticipated learning so much from a single encounter. He described the guard's calm and unwavering presence, the clarity of purpose, and the strength of principle. The aides understood that the officer had experienced something profound, a realization that authority and respect were not the same, and that discipline rooted in understanding could inspire admiration far more than blind obedience. In the days that followed, the palace continued its routine, yet the memory of the guard's actions remained fresh in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Staff and guards spoke quietly of the example set that day, sharing the story as a source of inspiration. The guard's steadfastness had not only upheld the traditions of the palace, but had also illustrated the enduring value of courage and principle in everyday actions. For the officer, the experience left a lasting impression. He reflected on how often leaders face situations where their authority is assumed, yet true respect is earned through understanding and integrity. He realized that the guard's actions were a model for how discipline, courage, and adherence to principles could command admiration in any context. It was a lesson he would carry with him throughout his career and beyond. The guard, meanwhile, continued his duties without fanfare. He did not seek recognition or praise, yet his actions spoke volumes. Those around him recognized the quiet power of his example, understanding that true respect is demonstrated through consistent adherence to values and unwavering commitment to duty. The palace, its traditions, and its people had been reinforced by a single, silent act of courage that had resonated far beyond the courtyard. In the end, the incident became a story told and retold, a reminder that integrity and honor are expressed not only through words or ceremonies, but through steadfast commitment to principle. The guard's refusal had shocked and impressed everyone, not because it was defiance, but because it was an affirmation of values that transcended individual authority. It was a moment that highlighted the importance of discipline, respect, and courage in the most subtle yet profound way. The courtyard, once tense with expectation, now symbolized a place where principle triumphs over mere authority, where respect is earned through integrity, and where courage is displayed not through force but through calm, deliberate action. The guard remained a silent teacher, a living example of what it means to uphold tradition and values with dignity and unwavering resolve. And the foreign officer, now profoundly changed by the experience, carried this lesson into the wider world, a testament to the power of principle and the enduring impact of courage in the quietest of forms.